Welcome. On behalf of the Bountiful Emergency Preparedness Council, we welcome you to a wildfire seminar, which is how to prepare for and survive wildfire in Bountiful. We are basing this seminar off of recent events that happened in Marshall, Colorado. On December 30th, they experienced a catastrophic fire going through several areas of their city. So we have two presenters this evening. First is Rob Hunter, who is our director for our Bountiful CERT program. And then Carly Kinney, who is also one of our CERT coordinators for the CERT program, who are also both members of the Bountiful City Emergency Preparedness Council. Rob is a former paramedic and EMT, and besides being a member of our council, Carly also had experiences with wildfires when she was having problems in California. So anyway, we have prepared a lot of information, some good video, some really good experiences that people can learn from. And we would like to go to the introductory video.
181 Mohawk Circle. I have a party trapped in their home due to the fire. 1232.
2619.
2619.
Emergency traffic. We're on Cherokee Avenue and Fox Lane. We have multiple houses on fire. We are backing out of here. We are in heavy fire, heavy fire.
The fire's at the back. Go!
Okay.
Everybody head east. Get out of the store now.
Ayuda, bro, pero no tengo carro.
No habla.
Don't get the car.
You don't have a car?
No.
Get in. Back this side. Back door. Back door.
Come on. We gotta go. Oh my God, no! It's everywhere. Where was the warning? I don't know where to go. Where'd my family go? No. Wait on you.
That's pretty intense, isn't it? We don't mean to scare people, but it was an intense scene. We interviewed a lot of people that evacuated from that fire. There was a whole city of people that evacuated, about the size of Bountiful. And we learned a lot. It was really surprising to us, some of the lessons that we learned. We're going to be sharing those with you tonight. For example, what survivors said you need to know, and you probably don't. Things that they said worked and other things that didn't.
We're also going to talk about when to evacuate and what to take, products that may not work as you have expected, and lessons to consider from those who had to evacuate. So, what was the Marshall Fire? These next few clips will give you a glimpse of the reality of what a suburban fire may look like.
Go as far east as you can.
Tonight, a life-threatening situation near Boulder, Colorado, where fires are forcing thousands of families to evacuate.
That's right, Tom. This is a depressing sight that you can see right behind me. We're near Avista Hospital, the neighborhood right next to this hospital, which is about just a couple hundred yards away. It's St. Andrews Lane and Dillon Street. You can see that many of these homes are on fire. We're looking at locations that to the left of where the flames are, there are just foundations that are left standing and the homes are completely gone. Firefighters were here trying to save what they can, staying out on the perimeter, but it looks like it's a futile effort with all these winds that continue to blow.
There were over 1,000 homes that were destroyed. And over 600 homes damaged.
It's amazing how you can still see fires, small fires burning, and what's left of these homes.
And that's at least 12 hours later after those fires started. So why are we talking about the Marshall Fire that happened in Colorado when we live here in Bountiful? Well, there are a lot of similarities between this community in Colorado and our community in Bountiful. Our geography is similar. We both live close to the foothills. We both have strong downslope winds at times. Our elevation is pretty similar. The size of our cities, if you combine Superior and Louisville, which were the two cities that were burned and had to be evacuated, 12 square miles versus 13 square miles for Bountiful, not much difference. Our latitude's the same. Everything all the way down to our hospital size is very similar, and they had to evacuate their whole hospital. The other reason we're talking about it is because we're in a drought, and we've already had fires in Bountiful, and we're afraid that we may have more in the future.
So here we can see the size and shape of the Marshall Fire on our map of Bountiful City. It's sobering to see how much area was burned relative to the size of our own city.
So that fire is the same size. It's not necessarily saying the areas that are more at risk. We're not saying that if you're in that orange area, you're in danger, but that is the same size as the fire that burned in Colorado. So let's talk about why you might need to evacuate. Because in most emergencies, you don't need to evacuate. Even a damaged home provides better shelter than a tent. And you're better off being with your friends and your neighbors and all the supplies that are in your home as opposed to being a refugee with a backpack. But there is one time when you need to evacuate. And well, whenever it isn't safe at your home, you need to evacuate. In some parts of the country, that's because of hurricanes. Here, it could be because of an individual structure fire, just your house on fire, or a big wildfire, or a suburban inferno like they had in Colorado. It could be a hazardous material incident, something happening with the train tracks or on the interstate, or one of the refineries, a problem with the refineries, or flooding in parts of our city. So here comes a video from some people that are in Colorado showing you how their life changed pretty quickly.
It's funny when you wake up on an average day and it's just like any other day, and then all of a sudden you look out and you see billows of brown smoke and you're wondering, well, where's that coming from? And then all of a sudden in an instant everything changes. And now we hadn't expected an evacuation order in Superior. So last thing on our minds, all of a sudden I'm running around the house packing things, thinking what's important, throwing it into a car. We rendezvoused, and then we spent, like Debbie said, about an hour and a half trying to get out of our neighborhood.
So they had one way of telling that there was danger. They saw weird smoke, but there are other ways to find out that you may need to evacuate. Here in our city, the two emergency alert systems, the official one is Code Red. That's the reverse 911 system for all of Davis County. We're putting a link up on the screen, and I believe there's one on the YouTube chat that will show the address you can go to sign up for those alerts. You'll automatically get some because of reverse 911, but since there's so many people that have cell phones that aren't linked to an address yet, you can get more information and information quicker about your neighborhood if you go to this website and sign up so that they know your cell phone is linked to your address. We also recommend Twitter. The Bountiful Emergency Preparedness Council has a Twitter feed. And when there's a disaster and we activate our Emergency Operations Center, we end up sending out tweets with information about evacuation zones or shelters or anything else related to the emergency, and floods where we can get sandbags. And often we will have that information and tweet it out, and then the news channels get that information from our tweets and put it out in the news. So if you want to get it quicker than the news has it, sign up for our Twitter feeds.
So evacuation, when? How do you know if you need to evacuate from your home? Rob just talked about alerts. Those are very important. Sometimes people evacuate because they can see something or smell something that is not quite right, and they realize that they are in harm's way. Even when an alert is given, we or we observe something ourselves, we tend to delay. We tend to delay evacuating, we procrastinate. It takes us time to come to terms with our bad luck, so to speak. We have a tendency to believe that everything will be okay because it almost always has been okay before. We call this normalcy bias. Amanda Ripley, the author of the book Unthinkable, talks about how our brain works in these scenarios. She talks about how our brain works by identifying patterns. It understands information from the past, or it uses information from the past to understand what is happening in the present and to anticipate the future. This pattern usually works really well most of the time, but our brain is slow to recognize exceptions. We may tell ourselves, well, there isn't that much smoke, or this hasn't happened here before, and we delay acting. Let me give you an example. My family is from Southern California, where we enjoy the 4 seasons of earthquake, fire, winds, and mudslides. It is not uncommon for us to smell or even see smoke blowing around in the summer and fall months. Well, one hot, windy November Saturday, my husband was teaching an ACT prep class and our home was full of teenagers. I took my young kids up to my parents' house a mile up the street to get out of the way. And my mom and I smelled smoke. So we decided to drive to the top of our neighborhood to see if we could see what was going on. And we walked over to a house whose yard backed up to miles of rolling hills. And we saw a wall of fire heading our way. We instantly realized that it was our turn this time. And I raced home and told my husband that we needed to send these teenagers home. My husband, who had only seen some smoke and smelled some smoke, said, "Oh, it's fine. They can finish taking their test. I'll send them home in a few minutes." But I, having seen the fire and realizing that the danger was imminent, said, "No, these kids need to leave now." And so we sent them on their way. Normalcy bias. We are used to what we are used to, and we have a hard time accepting that it may be us that's in danger this time.
There were a lot of people in Colorado that had that same thing where they said, we've smelled smoke all summer that's been coming from far away. So we didn't think there was going to be much to this.
Yeah, certainly. Another reason we delay is because of decision uncertainty. Even when we receive an alert, we want that confirmed through another source, whether it's a website or our neighbors or any other sort of media, or even just observing for ourselves. We don't want to look like we're overreacting. We don't want to be the only ones packing up our car in front of our neighbors. So we delay until we feel that we have enough information. Unfortunately, once it is obvious that you need to evacuate, it's almost too late. If the police are pounding on your door or making a PA announcement down your street, the time to prepare is over, and you are often left having to evacuate immediately. You run the risk of extreme traffic and stress, and your life may be in danger as well. Sometimes there is no warning. That certainly has happened before, where people were in their homes and their backyards or even their homes caught on fire, especially in these sort of wind events. That is very traumatic, and it does happen, and it's something that we need to be aware of. The takeaway is, when you have a choice, the when to evacuate is early. We will now look at some footage from the Marshall Fire of some of the evacuation that happened, as well as some firsthand accounts of the people who had to evacuate.
These people have fully loaded carts coming out of Costco, not realizing that they're in danger. And when they went into the store, they probably had no idea that there was a fire out there. This fire happened so quick. Now the sheriff's coming to help evacuate the rest of the store.
Evacuate now. East, go. Evacuate. Everybody head east. Go towards 36. Move now. Leave your stuff. Go. The fire's at the back. Go. Everybody head east. Get out of the store.
and I saw these billowing clouds, and at first I'm like, well, that's weird. What kind of storm is that? I mean, because it was sunny. And then I realized that these clouds are different. And so I grabbed one of my kids and I drove out up the hill and kind of like just to get a better visual of what's going on. And I was able to look west towards the mountains. And I saw this billowing smoke, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a fire. Like this is, so I came back and I told my wife, told my other son, I think we may need to evacuate. So we actually had 30 minutes until the sheriffs got here. And as a result of that, I think we were much better prepared to evacuate than somebody else that literally got a knock on the door. You need to get the heck out of here right now. So at this point, and it was me and about 15 other people in their cars. We're just looking, you know, we're behind Safeway. I felt like we were pretty safe. It burns. Well, that 1 minute drive, instead of exiting immediately, was a mistake, because when I got back on the road and tried to exit, the flames had crossed over the road. So I slammed on my brakes right where Safeway was, like literally where I was just 5 minutes ago. And I'm like, oh no. I mean, I slammed on my brakes and went, you know, against traffic in some ways, and I was able to exit from one other road that was open. And that road, which was past the hospital, by the way, there was fire on the left, fire on the right, and embers on the middle of the road. And I gunned it. I was going like 80 miles an hour in like a 35-mile-per-hour zone. I mean, there were nobody in front of me, and there's fire everywhere. Like I drove through it, and you know, adrenaline takes over. And I didn't want my tires to catch on fire, because one of the embers actually hit the car and it shocked me. And I drove like a maniac to get past. It was almost like a gauntlet of fire. I don't know if you've ever seen people evacuating fire zones. There's fire on the left and the right, and you drive through it. And that's what happened to me.
But the winds were blowing at about 100 miles an hour. And I heard a knock, it wasn't a knock, a pounding on the door, a very, very aggressive, loud pounding. And I opened the door, and a police officer, a female police officer, who had been running from home to evacuate families, said we had 90 seconds to leave. And so we grabbed some coats out of the front closet. I happen to have my work computer, which I'm using right now. And that was it.
That's pretty crazy, isn't it? Margaret was in her house working, not looking out the windows. Our houses are sealed up pretty well, so she didn't smell any smoke, even though there was smoke outside. She didn't know there was a fire until someone was pounding on her door, telling her she needed to evacuate. And her house was destroyed by the fire. That's pretty scary. I heard from some of the people that were at that Costco that said that it took 45 minutes just to get out of the parking lot. And we don't think of it as being that long to get out of the parking lot, but that's when people are coming and going, not everyone trying to leave at the same time. I also heard from someone else that was in the area that saw a family walking and picked them up. They had been at Costco and in the thick smoke couldn't find their car, so they started walking away. Pretty crazy, all the traffic and hardship that smoke can cause. But let's talk some more about how do people evacuate. Almost everyone from any disaster is going to evacuate in the vehicle. They don't walk away, except for that one family that couldn't find their car. They would have taken their car if they could find it. So what does that mean for us? That means that we need to keep our car ready for an evacuation. Keep gas in your tank. Keep your gas tank at least half full. Another thing that we need to think about is that there were power outages caused by this fire. And that caused more traffic because of traffic lights being out. It also caused a problem for quite a few people that couldn't get their car out of their garage with the power being out. All of the garage door openers I'm aware of have a rope that you pull on it to release it, and then you can lift it up manually. But maybe they were missing their rope, or maybe they'd never done it and didn't know how it worked. I don't know, but that's something that I hope that everyone watching this will check out. We'll see how can you open your garage door and get your vehicle out even with a power outage. Now we're going to see a video of Greg going home to rescue his dog.
I went back home and the smoke was all over the place. There were ashes falling to the ground. And I thought, I better get the dog and get out of here really quickly. So I went inside, threw my gym bag down with my bathing suit and wet towel, actually hung up my wet towel for some reason. I don't know why, but I did, and grabbed the dog and grabbed nothing else. Immediately, as soon as I got out of my local neighborhood, I was in bumper to bumper traffic because everybody in the town was trying to evacuate at that time.
Very stressful. When it comes time to evacuate, do you know where you are going to go? You may consider staying with family, friends, at a hotel, or a shelter. This is something that you really are going to want to research ahead of time. We'll show this clip from Bill, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this.
But there were a lot of people that didn't have places to go. And so I think one of the things in an emergency preparedness is, where am I going to go and how do I get there?
Okay, so as you consider your plan for your family, you're going to want to take into consideration every member of your family. For example, if you have pets, do you have friends and family that will be okay with your pets coming with you? Same for a hotel. Lots of hotels don't take pets, some do. Most emergency shelters do not take pets. So that is something that you're going to want to plan for ahead of time. Whatever you decide, make sure that everybody in your family knows where to go before the disaster, before the evacuation. Many people had trouble with cell phone reception during this Marshall Fire, which was a little bit surprising for some of us.
Cell phone
we'll talk a little bit more about that.
That you don't know until you're actually in the emergency was so spotty. We couldn't even hear one another. My wife was in a different street than I was. We kind of got separated a little bit, and we couldn't call one another. Texts weren't going through because everybody's using them. I physically had to leave my car with my nephews and walk through a couple of cul-de-sacs to find my wife just to talk to her.
You said that I need to plan where I'm going to go, especially with my pets. Can I come to your house with my dog?
Probably not. Yeah, I'm probably not your best contact. Sorry, Rob.
Okay.
Okay. So Dr. Leah talked about how many people had trouble. They had trouble with cell phone reception, and this added tremendously to the stress of their evacuation. That is why it is really important that you decide ahead of time where you guys will meet, where you and your family will meet. How will you get there? Disasters are unpredictable. It's really important to learn all the alternate routes that you could take from your home to get to your pre-planned evacuation area. Normal routes may not be passable. When we were evacuating from our house, the most immediate route was blocked up with traffic. It was completely backed up. And so I did a U-turn and started heading out a different route. And as we were going that way, the park adjacent to my kids' elementary school was on fire. And that's when the people in my car, including myself, started to panic, because all of a sudden we got the feeling, or even the realization, that this fire is everywhere and we don't even know exactly where. It was very unpredictable. So it's very important to pre-think all of the different routes you could take to get out of your neighborhood so that you will not feel as helpless and that you'll be able to keep moving in an evacuation.
And not only does your route may be blocked by fire, but Siri can't help you.
Right.
Because you don't have an internet connection anymore. So you can't, anyone that's depending on directions from their phone is out of luck. You need to have a paper map or a downloaded map.
Right.
Or I guess a GPS, a standalone GPS would work.
So yeah, you're gonna have to think for yourself. Siri won't be there. Siri won't be there for us this time.
Think for myself.
So yeah, consider those alternate routes and drive them. And especially if you have teenagers who may not be super familiar with all the different ways to get in and out, that's something that you can do. with them is to practice different streets. Why do we need to prepare ahead of time? Why? Because our brains don't work very well in disasters. We delay, we freeze, we panic. We tend to overestimate how well our brains will perform in a real crisis. And that's why we tend to blow off drills sometimes, is because we think, well, you know, when it comes to the crisis, the adrenaline will be pumping and I'll know exactly what to do. And sometimes that does happen, but more times than not, that adrenaline can actually be a disservice, and we sometimes are not quite sure what the next step is. Another reason to prepare ahead of time is because it's pretty easy. All you really need to do is take a few hours with your family and talk about things, make a plan, make a route, make a list, and it is inexpensive. The things we're going to talk about next will be items that you already have in your own home, and you won't have to really buy anything extra. You can just gather and be prepared to evacuate.
So let's look at this video of someone who was not prepared and the consequences of that.
Come on, we gotta go.
12:40 Thursday, Chrissy Funk got the frantic call from her stepmom.
It's like, get dad, get the dogs. The fire is in the field.
Come on!
The field was right behind their home, the home she was now trying to flee.
Oh my God, no!
After grabbing what she could, flames now erupting all around her.
It's everywhere. Where was the warning?
And you hear me kind of saying, like, let's go, because now there's a train of us trying to get out of a neighborhood, and people are slowing down because they're driving through flames.
I don't know where to go. Where'd my family go? No, wait, I'm here.
Her family home that once looked like this, today looks like this. Nothing more than a foundation left.
That's pretty scary. That tugs on my emotions, seeing that panic, because, well, I can imagine being in that situation, I guess. So let's talk about 72-hour kits, a kit that a lot of people have to be prepared. I think there's a problem with every 72-hour kit out there.
What's the problem, Rob?
Well, one is that it's a list on the internet, and it's not your list.
That's true.
So if it's not your list, it's not going to work for you. You need to make your own list. Some of the lists that are out there are people that are trying to sell you something. But there are very few people that's their own list. Another problem with them is that I think a lot of people, when they're thinking of what do I need in my 72-hour kit, are thinking about movie apocalypse scenes. They're not thinking about what really happens, the situations where people really need to evacuate for their homes. Or the things like the storms and the flooding, wildfires and hurricanes. That's why hundreds of thousands of people actually do evacuate every year. And another problem with 72-hour kits, why 72 hours?
It's a good question.
Because all the people that were in this fire that I talked to, most of them had to stay away for 5 days or more. So 72 hours isn't enough. But the people that I talked to, they really didn't need a 72-hour kit. They went to a hotel. There were a few people that went to a hotel, but most went to a family member's home or a friend's home, stayed with friends. There were shelters. I didn't find anyone that went to a shelter, but at all of those places, they provided food and bedding. And so you didn't need a lot of things that would normally be in a traditional 72-hour kit. Another big problem with 72-hour kits is that people forget to bring them because they never use them.
Yeah, that certainly happened to us when we evacuated our home from that fire.
I talked to people that literally tripped over their 72-hour kits trying to get out the door because they kept them right by the door, but they didn't think to bring them. I think that's just because it's not something that we normally use. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have emergency supplies or disaster supplies in your home, because I think everyone should. I think that we've learned during this pandemic that there are things that we can't predict, problems with supply lines, and we may need supplies, but I don't think they all need to be in a kit. Let's watch what Greg said about his 72-hour kits.
All I had was the dog at that point, and the clothes on my back, obviously, and a cell phone. I didn't grab our 72-hour kits. I didn't grab any of our suitcases, any of her medication that she takes. And so I wasn't thinking very clearly at that time. I think I was just get the dog and get out was my only thought, because the smoke was pretty significant around us. Not in the house so much, but in the neighborhood. And the ash falling down scared me enough that I said, I got to move quickly.
He had great kits. His wife had pre-packed suitcases of kits, but they don't do any good for you if they're in a closet. You've got to bring them with you. So we've got to find a way to keep from tripping over our survival kits or our 72-hour kits and forgetting our kits and actually bringing them with us. This next clip is one of the most impressive ideas that I learned from someone that I interviewed, of having a list.
The great thing about this is that my wife, who is like the emergency preparedness queen, has a list. I mean, she has an actual list of like things that, and she's so organized. Like if for me, I would just get my computer and maybe and get in the car. She's so organized. She has a 15-minute evacuation order, a 30-minute, and a 1 hour. And she does it by room. All right, so, ground floor, basement, main floor, upper floor, like in every room, she has this list, so she could go and pick. And luckily, we had our boys and our nephew came, that we were able to load up 3 cars, pretty full. Well, it was my wife who was in charge, so she would say, okay, here is, she has multiple copies of this. So she handed this list to every member of the family and said, okay, you take care of bedroom number 2, I'll take care of the master bedroom, you do the bathroom. So we divided and conquered in some ways. But if it wasn't for her list or her organization, our evacuation would have been haphazard at best. And I'm sure we would have left things behind. I mean, I give all the credit to my wife. And she's had this list, by the way, for 25 years. And sometimes I used to make fun of her, like, what do you, this, we're never going to use this list. Wrong. Turns out that we did need it.
I think that's a great idea to have the list. That's something that my family's worked on. We've just talked about it over the dinner table.
Yeah.
Didn't come up with everything all at once, talked over the course of several nights and came up with a list, and it's posted on the refrigerator.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Having a prioritized list can save a lot of stress. In our house, we have a really short list on our pantry door, so that if something were to happen and we needed to evacuate quickly, it's written down. We do not have to think. It's all right there, and we know exactly what we want to grab. We really liked what Dr. Aaliyah, how he talked about having different, types of lists for different timeframes. If you had to evacuate immediately, what are the top 5 or 6 things you would want to grab? If you had 5 minutes, if you had 15, if you had 30. And that's a really helpful exercise to do with your family. We'd also recommend that you post those on every level of your home. And practice. The muscle memory of practicing going to that list and gathering those items is really important. When we evacuated from our house, well, it wasn't a house fire, but the wildfires in California, when we came back home, I realized my 72-hour kits were right here. And I think a lot of the reason, a big reason why I didn't grab them is we were not in the habit of grabbing those and taking those out with us. What else, Rob?
Well, I think that's why you need a go bag, something that you are in a habit of grabbing. So a go bag would be kind of like a mini 72-hour kit, but just the things that you need for an overnight trip, because that's what people that evacuated their house needed. They just needed the things that you would normally take with you on an overnight trip. And that's going to vary from person to person, what you need. Someone with the baby, of course, has to bring baby supplies. Someone with may have a walker that they need to get around. That's going to be high up on their list of things to bring with them whenever they go on an overnight trip. But if you consider what you need and what your family needs whenever you're going on an overnight trip, whether it's to visit a family member or to stay in a hotel, those are the kinds of things that you really need in your go bag to take with you, whether it's an evacuation for an emergency or just because you're leaving for overnight. So some things that everyone needs: wallet, keys, phone, and charger for your phone. And people don't generally forget the wallet, keys, and phone. And I think the reason for that is because they're used to grabbing it. They grab that every time when they leave their house. One thing that they are not used to grabbing that I think is really important, a lot of the people we talked to forgot this or had to go back for it, was medications. And the idea that we came up with was grab something like this medication sorter. And a lot of people that take medications will use something like this. They'll put their medication for the week in the compartments just to keep track of what they've taken. And but if you just buy 2 of these, then you have one filled for this week and the next one for next week, the second one for next week, and you can keep that with your go bag.
Yeah, excellent idea. Everybody forgot their medications.
So if you keep one already stocked with your go bag and you just rotate through them every week, you'll have the medications you need already packed up. Of course, any other medical devices that you need, a change of clothes, water bottle, a snack. And we're not talking about the amount of water that you need for 72 hours. We're just talking about a water bottle, just something, the same kind of thing. If you were taking a car trip, what do you need to stay comfortable while you're driving across town?
Yeah, it's also a great reason to keep your car stocked with water and snacks, especially since, like we talked about, most of our evacuations will be happening by vehicle.
And especially when you have kids.
Yes. Most moms probably already have those things in their car.
But we recommend that you keep this go bag packed all the time and that you use it. That is a key part. If you use this bag every time you leave town, then you're not going to forget it when you have to leave town in an emergency.
It's that muscle memory.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about things that you don't need in this kit. You probably don't need a tent because, as we said, you're going to somewhere that has shelter already. You probably don't need sleeping bags. Even the shelter that when we talked to Red Cross, they said they provide you with 3 blankets.
Unless you have a dog, you may then need your tent.
Okay.
Little joke.
Yeah, because the shelters, they won't let you stay with your dog. They often partner with the Humane Society and will have some kind of kennel facilities outside the shelter, but the dog isn't allowed inside the shelter. Lots of lists for 72-hour kits have camping gear like a compass and fire starting stuff. And I just have a hard time imagining how I'm ever going to use a compass in this kind of emergency, or cooking equipment. And anyhow,
you most likely will not be.
Probably not. So let's see this video of Bill, who said that he needed some masks because of the thick smoke.
It was, when I left the car, I grabbed 3. We always carry spare masks. We have to wear masks here. COVID masks. So I grabbed 3 and I wore 3 masks, and Holly wore masks. But when I looked out, as I was running back and forth to the truck, it was so dark, just a few houses away from us across the street. You couldn't see anything.
We talked to a lot of people that even in the middle of the day, it was dark. So they were surprised by that. And the smoke, someone said that as soon as they got outside, their eyes were full of soot. If you think about other disasters, whether it's windstorms that we have a lot of here, or the World Trade Center disaster, there's a lot of dust in the air. And having a good mask can keep that dust out of your lungs. People in New York have a lot of residual health effects and cancer, regrettably, from the World Trade Center dust that they were breathing. Goggles are another great thing to have in a disaster. So these are some extra things to protect you that you aren't normally going to have on an overnight trip, but we suggest having this in your go bag. Maybe it can be a separate compartment of your go bag. It could just be, a grocery bag that you take out of your go bag when you're going on an overnight trip where you don't need these supplies. Others protective equipment that you might want in a disaster are work gloves. In case there's something blocking your way, you can lift the debris out of the way to continue driving. And consider good footwear for people in a disaster, because there may be debris that could injure you, such as broken glass or nails that have come off roofs.
Okay, so Rob talked about flashlights and headlamps. Very important. Obviously, if you're evacuating in the middle of the night, it's obvious. But even as Bill was talking about, if there is enough smoke in the middle of the day, it'll be dark and it could be difficult to see.
And you're going to a different location. So it's not like walking around your house in the dark, which
That's true.
You're going to be somewhere different.
Very good. Okay, going back to that paper map, having something that's not web-based. So whether it's a paper map or a downloaded electronic map, so that you have something that's set that you can refer to for how to get where you need to go or want to go. Also having a water filter or purification tablets for contaminated water. That was also a little bit interesting for us to learn. Even people whose homes were not destroyed by the fire, they did not have clean water for several weeks after the fire. And they had boil orders, or they had to filter their water, all sorts of things. So that's something that would be helpful to keep with you, because even if you are staying somewhere that was not affected, the water could be temporarily affected.
Right. So in case your friend that you're staying with doesn't have water purification, you bring it with you.
Exactly.
Sounds good. So let's talk about documents, important documents. That's another thing that if you're leaving your house in emergency, you probably want to take. During the Marshall Fire, people lost everything that was left behind. Fireproof safes did not protect their documents.
So crazy.
It is.
We
And
assume.
that messed up my plans for document preservation. A lot of people lost all of their documents, and it's taken a lot of work to get those replaced. But there's one document that if you lose it, it makes life much more difficult. That's your driver's license. Because if you can prove who you are, you can get all of the other things replaced. But it's hard to prove who you are if your driver's license and all of your other paperwork has been destroyed.
And fortunately, out of habit, you most likely will have your driver's license with you. So that's the good news here.
Yep.
Other documents that we would encourage you to take photos of or scan would be documents such as your birth certificate, passports, insurance policies, deeds, titles, bank information. Having a list of the house contents for insurance purposes has proved to be very valuable to people when they are trying to figure things out after their house is burned down. Having copies of your prescription information, having recent photos of family members, as well as having photos and scans of irreplaceable photos that are important to you.
Why do I need recent photos of family members?
You might want those if your family gets separated during an evacuation.
Right.
And that
So
way,
you're
you
holding
can
up a
show.
picture saying, have you seen this person? Have you
Yep.
seen this child?
But hopefully that won't happen because you will have your predetermined meeting place. But having recent photos is an excellent idea.
Sounds good. All right, so there's lots of different ways that you can have these documents with you. Let me show you something. Some people are going to use their phone to save pictures, and you can these days with the iPhone, you can scan images and have all of your images saved on your phone. But another way is with a USB drive like this, and these are available with encryption. This particular one, this iron key, is I think is made for government encryption work. If you
Wow.
enter the password wrong on this 10 times, it self-destructs.
Not for me.
I'm serious.
That one's not for me then.
It's more expensive, but it's kind of cool. And if you're going to have it with you all the time, and in a kit that is, not guarded, you don't want this stolen, because this has all of your important documents. It'd be really easy to take over your life, to assume your identity with all of this paperwork. So definitely don't use the free USB drive that some promotion gave you, because you don't know what kind of malware may have been installed on that.
Hashtag stay safe.
Right. Another thing that I think is kind of related to that, because we've learned that so much of our evacuation is by car, and how much we depend on our phones. Something that I've added to my kit is one of these power banks. It can charge your phone
That's awesome.
lots of times, but it also, look, it comes with jumper cables.
Check that out.
So I can use this to jump my car. So in case, and you're already having a really bad day that you have to just evacuate, right?
For sure.
What if your car battery is dead? I can start it now.
Win-win. Okay. What is the number one thing survivors want you to know?
Yes, we asked people the number one thing. We asked everyone that we interviewed, what's the number one thing that you think people need to know that they may not? They said insurance. You do not have enough insurance. There are so many people in Colorado right now that are realizing they were underinsured, and it's
awful.
horrible.
Yeah.
It's in normal times, they say that about 2/3 of people are underinsured with their home. But think about how much the price of building supplies have gone up recently, and how much inflation there is now. So I would guess that almost everyone is underinsured. And for these people, some of them, that means they're not going to be able to rebuild. They're not going to be able to live there anymore. They're going to have to leave their neighborhood because they can't afford to rebuild their home. Even making the property back to normal again,
right,
is hugely expensive.
What was that cost for
One
that?
person that I talked to said that the cost, because it's all a hazardous material site at this
Right.
point with everything that's burned, the cost to scoop up all the hazardous material, the foundation, the dirt, and then replace it with clean dirt would have been $75,000. And her insurance only paid, I think it was $5,000.
Oh my word.
So let's talk about pets
Okay,
for a minute.
let's do it.
This was another lesson that we learned from a lot of people. Pets can be a problem. And we know that some people went back to their house for pets. They
lot of
risked
people did.
risked their life for pets. That's understandable. I don't fault them for that. But the thing that we learned is that when you freak out, pets freak out. And when pets are freaked out, it is hard
Nobody's
to get
happy.
them to do stuff. So there's one person I talked to that said the police came and said, you need to leave in 10 minutes. And it took them 30 minutes to get the cats gathered up that were hiding around the house and hiding under the beds and kept running to somewhere else and hiding. So our advice that we ran by lots of people is, in the future, would you recommend getting the pets first before you do anything else? Yeah. If you're going to evacuate, take care of your pets, get them in a pet carrier of some sort before you gather up your other things.
Of course, my advice is just don't get a pet, but I get it. I mean, I get it. Pets are special.
All right, let's look at this video. Another person talking about having the grab list.
And Sister Ringel, when she went in to grab her, she came home from her fitness center, and the policeman met her at the door and said, you need to be out of here in 5 minutes. So she thought, okay, I've got 5 minutes to grab something. She didn't grab anything. She just ran out the house and got in the car. So her brain wasn't functioning, didn't think about it. If she had a list in front of her, then she wouldn't have had to think about it. She just would have said, okay, I'm going to grab these 3 things before I go.
Okay, so some action items for all of you. Prioritized evacuation grab list. Make that list. If you have 5 minutes, what will you take? If you have 15, what will you take? Write it out, post it, where everyone in your family knows where it is. They don't have to think, they just have to do. Deciding where you will go. Make a plan, make sure everybody knows how to get there, make sure they know multiple ways how to get there, and determine that spot.
And what's your number one takeaway, your number one lesson you want everyone to know?
My number one takeaway, well, I probably have two.
Okay.
One is to plan. Plan, prepare, practice. Really plan ahead what you want to take and where you want to go. And my second takeaway is evacuate early.
Evacuate early like Katie did. Katie is a good example for us.
Okay.
All right. So hi, I guess I'm Katie. And I was in the city of Chico when the Paradise Fire was happening. And so I've been exposed to fires in California. I'm very familiar with them. And you can tell who has been in the fire and who has moved from Paradise because their taillights are melted. And they melted because they were stuck in a line of traffic trying to get out of Paradise. And people actually had to abandon their cars, some people, because the fire was right there and there was just too much traffic to get out. So when the Marshall Fire got close to my house and my neighborhood, even though we weren't in the evacuation zone, but you can see the smoke, you know it's coming. I did not want to take any chances, mainly because I did not want to be stuck in traffic. Like the fire was very scary too, but knowing everybody evacuating last minute was a lot more scary for me. So that's why we grabbed the animals, we packed up, and we just got right out of there.
Okay, we've got Assistant Chief Edwards with Bountiful City Police Department, who is Bountiful's emergency manager here to take a few questions, and Chief Dane Stone of the South Davis Metro Fire Department, who are here to take questions. One of the first questions that we got that we should probably address is that we were asked, will this recording be available to view at a later time as well? I'd like to show it to some family members. And the answer to that is yes, we should have a copy of this recording posted up on YouTube probably by this weekend. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Chief Edwards. First off, are there preset evacuation zones or centers in Bountiful in case we were to have a fire?
Yes, we have preset evacuation sites for that initial phase where you might need to leave your home quickly and get to a site where you can gather yourself, gather your family before you move away to your location that you determine from there, meaning before you go to a family member or to a hotel, or even possibly in another city. Those sites are 2 LDS churches, one on Main Street and Center Street, and one at 2600 and South and 5th West. And these sites are pre-planned because they have easy access to the freeway. There's a lot of sites there where potentially we could put disaster tents up if needed from Red Cross in those areas. And also there are facilities there, meaning there are junior high schools there, meeting places, the rec center's close. And we have the needs, we can meet the needs of this public in the event of emergency in those locations.
Another question directed to you. How can we find out what's happening during a fire? Will cell phones work in an emergency?
Cell phones work in an emergency are something that we don't count on. We hope that we have them and we're grateful if they exist, but in the emergency, we'll put out information several different ways, primarily through social media, which as soon as you get to an area where you have some internet access, you can get those messages, but also the radio stations, TV stations. As soon as we have information that is relative to an emergency in our area, we'll be broadcasting on all those airwaves that we can get to.
Okay, we have a question here for Chief Stone, and that is, are there any fire breaks along the east foothills in Bountiful like Centerville has? Or are we in greater danger here in Bountiful?
It's a great question. We don't have the fire breaks in Bountiful like we have in Centerville, the fire break road up there. In the B, above the B, we do have some roads, obviously, but when it comes up above Bountiful Boulevard, we're very limited on those fire break roads. And luckily, above Bountiful Boulevard from about 4th North over, we don't have a lot of homes in there. So but we don't, and unfortunately, but that is a good thing in Centerville and the northern part of Bountiful is that fire break road.
And second question, just a general one for you. What general guidelines would you give the public when we have large scale fires? I hear firemen complaining about this all the time, about people who want to go and see the fire and they get in the way and everything. What kind of general guidelines can you give us to help make your job easier?
That is a great question, and it's just like anything else. When we have an emergency anywhere else, it's always good to obviously get out of the area. People love to come and see what's going on in the emergency. During the gun range fire, we had people that weren't even close to that area or live in that area, and they were coming into the area and blocking traffic and evacuation routes. So we couldn't get our fire engines and our apparatus into there. So it's always good when we do have the call to evacuate, and then stay out of the area. It's everybody wants to see, what's going on. It's the onlooker situation, right? And so, but I promise you the news will be there. They'll have a helicopter. They'll get good footage and you can see it on TV just as much and replay it if you want to. So.
Okay, we have another question that just came in. Is there any predetermined way to get information on a local fire so that we can be aware of the evacuation zones before someone pounds on the door?
Well, I believe Rob was talking about the Twitter feeds that you had. Bountiful City Police have a Twitter feed. We have a Twitter feed. And I think those are great resources to look into. Obviously, the code red and the reverse 911s are going to be helpful as well. But sometimes in desperate situations, we can't help but get to the point where the police are pounding on the doors. It happens too fast, and it is the way it is.
That's what happened in Colorado. The fire spread so quickly that people couldn't keep up. They by the time they got word back of where the fire was, it had already moved 100 yards.
And this leads into our next question, which was, what was the time frame from first report of the fire to the evacuation order? You know that.
I do not know that. I just heard from someone who there's about an hour for the first evacuation order in the Colorado fire.
Okay. For our gun range fire, how fast of a time there was there for the evacuation order?
I'll let Assistant Chief Edwards speak of that because I had nothing to do with the evacuation other than trying to get to where I needed to be. So without the police in that situation, that was such a great asset to have. So I'll let him address that.
In the gun range fire in particular, there really wasn't an official evacuation order in the initial stages because the fire was traveling so fast, much like the Marshall fire. It was being driven by downslope winds right into the homes. From the time it was seen until it was threatening homes was just a few minutes. That's what resulted in officers pounding on doors and trying to get people out of their homes, partially due again because of the time of day. This is when people were sleeping rather than in midday when people are on their phones and getting Twitter and normally responding to those things. The evacuation order, that official order, comes down more slowly, but the actual physical evacuation and contact of the homes is initiated by the first firemen and police that are on scene.
Okay. Another question quick for Chief Stone. John Fuller asks, will there be any permanent fire restrictions planned for Mueller Park, one of our most vulnerable fire risk areas?
Well, obviously, we always evaluate that when it comes closer to the season. We've already been starting to go down that path. A lot of that is the Forest Service, and we take their recommendations. They do have they always limit the fires up there into pits, and you can't have an open flame. But for right now, we're just kind of evaluating, seeing how the winter is going to be, and we're obviously, if we continue with the winter we're going to have, I feel that there'll probably be some more restrictions than normal.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are bumping up against the end of our allotted hour for this seminar. There is one bit of advice I wanted to pass on before we close. That was earlier in the chat. Brad Glad suggested upload a video of every nook and cranny of your belongings for insurance purposes and do it once a year. And that was great advice, Brad, and I wanted to make certain that we got that in there. And one last question. With the increasingly dry summers, there are plans to eliminate the use of fireworks, and then we will close for good.
Put me on the spot here. This is the hot seat tonight. They are the state governs fireworks for us. We really have we're limited to the lawmakers and what they decide, but each city has the ability to restrict fireworks. And as we did last year, and I think the public and Bountiful City's council and their mayor and the citizens were listened. They saw the dire straits that we were in, and we were very fortunate last year not to have any major fires up on the East Bench. And I think that's due because of what the public really realized, and they played a significant part in that. But I think the Bountiful Council is aware of the dire straits that we could be in this year, and I hope that we can enjoy fireworks. It's always I always make the stance that it's better to enjoy the professional fireworks than it is to have your own personal fireworks. That's just something that I believe in.
Okay, we would like to thank Chief Dane Stone, Chief Dane Stone, Assistant Chief Edwards, Rob Hunter, and Carly Kinney for coming and presenting this seminar. I really appreciate the amount of work that has gone into this. It was a great presentation. Again, we will have a video of it available to share probably by the end of this week. And you should be looking forward to our next Bountiful seminar, which will be on power generation in an emergency. On behalf of the Bountiful Neighborhood Emergency Preparedness Council, I would like to thank you for all tuning in to watch this live stream. Thank you and good night.